So once you have a script, and it depends on the scenario. If you're an independent producer and you've either gotten a writer to, the word spec it, to write it for free and they'll participate when you sell it, or you've paid them some money, you want to get paid back as soon as possible. And you want to be able to make a movie because unlike most people in the process, producers don't make any money unless a movie is made.
Lots of films get developed and don't get made because things don't come together. Either the actor didn't come through that they needed the proper actor for, or the budget was too high, or it didn't get the director that the studio felt comfortable with, or the subject matter was too violent or too silly, or it depends who's in charge of the studio too. I mean, sometimes certain films don't get made because they get stuck at a studio and the studio won't give them back. There's lots of reasons why films don't get made.
I would say probably 98% of everything that's developed is not made. I'd say it's a really hard, again, all depends on the source material. If it's an idea, some ideas look great when you buy them and don't look great when you see them on screen. Some ideas just don't get developed well. The writing is fair. Sometimes another movie comes out that's in a similar space and that, ends that movie. You can't cast it. It's too expensive to make, or it's too cheap to make. It doesn't have a big enough audience. It has, whatever the reasons are, most movies never get made that are developed.
It's 2.5 times the cost of production is usually looked at as break-even in domestic box office. There's a split between the exhibitor and the distributor. It's somewhere around 60-40, just as a ballpark estimate. So in order to get close to the recoupment of the production cost and the marketing, print, and advertising expenses, generally we'd like to see 2.5 times the cost of production.
So the studios feel very good coming out of the weekend with your budget covered, with the actual budget of the movie covered. Then the next hurdle is the marketing budget. But if you can cover your production budget opening weekend, it's a very good bet that the movie will be very profitable.
The fact that we are a production company and a sales company is advantageous in that really the sales drive the production. So we produce movies that we know can sell. 2, we can actually use the sales side of the business to help finance the film. We interact with buyers all over the world 12 times a year at least at all these markets, plus on top of that all the major film festivals like Sundance and Toronto, which aren't really markets, they're festivals, but the buyers are there. So we're continuously talking to these distributors around the world, and the fact that we're selling to them and the fact that they tell us what they want and the fact that maybe they can pre-buy some of these films, it's all part of getting movies made and getting movies distributed.
You can spend $30 million on a movie, and if you don't have the right distribution deal, even if that movie makes money, you could lose money. So it's very important that you negotiate deals that are beneficial to the movie, and it costs so much money to market a movie in today's world that it's $25-30 million to market just a standard movie. So it's very difficult for small independents to make it because the distributors and studios want bigger movies.
The producer always gets a share contractually of the profit participation. The question is, does the producer ever see the share that he's entitled to of the profit participation? And that depends sometimes on how good of an accountant the producer has, sometimes on how good of an attorney the producer has, and sometimes on how cooperative or uncooperative the distributor is.
As a sales company, we get a front-end deal and a back-end deal because depending on how involved we are in the film. But if we're actually producing the film, we'll get sales commission on every sale we make, plus we'll get a piece of the back end.
Well, I don't make movies just for a fee that they're going to pay me. There's generally an upfront fee, and then, which is the fixed compensation. Then there's a contingent fee that comes after that. Every one of my movies that I've ever worked on, I have had a very strong back end. And after I was making films for a while, I think I've done 30 movies now, either 29 or 30. I think that there's one that I've been missing. I've had a back end on every one of them, but on the latter films, like in the last bunch, I was a gross player. So I was getting gross from first dollar. And that's a privilege that is accorded to just a few producers in Hollywood.
The ultimate goal for any producer is to have a back-end deal. And they're impossible to get. It was easier 10 years ago, and it was probably easier 20 years before that. I would say that maybe 5 or 6 producers working today. I don't know how many guys, but there are not a lot of people who have back-end deals. But if you can get one, that's it, because you get paid for the work that you did for the life of the movie, which could go on for 20 years.
Marketing is crucial for a movie because you can have the greatest movie in the world, and if nobody sees it and nobody is aware of it, it's a disappointment.
Marketing of a film is as important as production is. I think that one of the reasons that a number of our films have done well is not necessarily that the films were great, but the marketing campaigns were. I think The Purge is a film that we made where the marketing campaign was phenomenal. And when you click into something that's bigger than the movie or everything else and it just becomes a part of the zeitgeist, that's when the magic happens. And that can only happen when the marketing department just nails their campaign for the movie. The marketing on The Purge could have been 5 to 6, 7 times as much as what the budget of the film was. And that's because the film was constructed to be played out in a house. So we only had one location. And the third act of the movie, we didn't even have lights. We were using flashlights as our lighting source. So the movie itself was very inexpensive. The marketing campaign becomes expensive because you have to take ads out on television shows, and that is an incredibly expensive thing. And you can't get a movie out there without taking out an ad on some real shows.
If it's an inexpensive movie, then the support really comes out. If it's a very expensive movie, it's hard to pull the legs out because it becomes self-fulfilling prophecy. If you make something great, you're watching the enthusiasm and from that enthusiasm, the money flow more freely and might be a change in release dates. It certainly is a change in money and the creation of materials as people start getting a handle on how to sell the movie.
If a film's a great film and it's poorly marketed, you'll suffer terribly. Marketing materials, TV spots, trailers, internet, advertising. You have to make sure your marketing department is in sync with you as the filmmakers and that they are really using their resources and putting a lot of money behind in the right areas, though. If you have a strictly, The Help, the movie The Help, you wouldn't be advertising The Help on ESPN football on Sunday. It doesn't make any sense. So it's where your marketing dollars go that's really important, and what your marketing campaign is. Marketing is everything. It's everything.
I mean, I've sold and distributed, marketed and distributed movies for 25 years and very successful ones. So I certainly want a hand in if I've sold the movie to a studio and on what's done. Sometimes they listen to you, sometimes they don't. I always felt when I was on the other side and running a studio is that you want input, and sometimes the input's great, sometimes the input's not great, but a smart person listens to people.
I think a typical marketing approach is to create the most visibility and awareness of the movie for the least possible cost. Speaking as an independent producer, not on big budget studio films, but to create as much awareness as you can for spending the least amount of money possible.
I will look at every conceivable ad that will be created by the distributor. I mean, sometimes I will go through hundreds of potential ads, and there are different ads for Europe, there's different ads for the Far East, there's different advertising for America. You have to really pick and choose where your markets are. I want to know where the film is going to be distributed, the theaters it's going into. So yes, it's an all-encompassing situation.
My partners and I are incredibly involved from early on. We look at early teaser posters, early teaser trailers. We approve everything. We give them footage that we want them to try to play with, images. We're very hands-on with marketing.
There are producers who are strongly involved in marketing. other producers not. There are producers who have the muscle to affect the marketing plan and or the budget, or a star in or star actor, or star director in the producer's film might have that muscle. Other producers, in my own experience, I've had a strong impact on some films. With Mike Nichols, we had a strong impact on The Graduate because that was a small-time distributor. With the major studios, I've had my fights and I've lost most of them.
The studios have great marketing teams, but everything is subjective. So it's important for producers who've spent a year and a half on a project. Now there's a 6-month window to market the movie. And if you don't stay on top of that process, not that as a producer you can really guide it, because that's really where the studio's expertise is, in marketing movies. But it is key to stay on top of it, to review materials, to sort of be an annoying pest to the marketing department and say, what about this? What about that? What's our TV campaign going to look like? What's the poster look like? And if you question what they're doing, they realize that they have to believe what they're doing. They have, it's another thing for them to reflect. And if you make 1 or 2 suggestions in the course of a campaign that affect something positively, that's all additive. Because if a movie fails, the studio walks away very quickly. Monday morning, they're on to the next movie. They don't care. They're like, okay, forget that one. Producer, sitting there at my desk crying and thinking how depressing it is that here's a movie you bought 5 years ago, you developed for 2 years or 3 years, you spent a year and a half making, sometimes it's a 5-year process, and on one weekend you're dead.
We as a producer have made a film. It's usually with the collaboration of the director's vision, and we also have an emotional instinct for how the best elements of that can be marketed. And the studio also has their own instincts of what they want to sell. I always say that a great marketing campaign asks a question that can only be answered by going to the movie. And sometimes you see these trailers where they've shown you the entire movie in a way, even right down to the kind of payoff scenes. And you go, I don't know why anybody wants to go see that now. So for me, the question is, can I be a diplomat? Because these are the guys that usually paid for the movie. And can I actually stimulate a way of explaining to them some of the things I believe? Marketing is magical. It's amazing sometimes the difference between a good campaign and a bad campaign. And a great movie can sometimes die with a bad campaign. And a bad movie can sometimes get an opening weekend. And an opening weekend then puts up all the box office values, and it puts up your TV values. And so that's a thing that people are always trying to figure out. I, as a producer, want to be involved in the choices that the marketing makes, because I'm hoping that I will be able to contribute things to guide and help the process.
Well, something that we're very proud of here is that to date we've had 8 movies come out. Of those 8 movies, 7 of them got back their budget opening weekend. Of those 7, 2 of them got back their budget opening night. And one of them, The Purge, got its budget back from the midnights.
Distribution is a key to a film success, because you can make movies in your bedroom all day long and no one's going to see them. So the key is to make sure you're making movies that audiences want to see, that distributors want. As a foreign sales company, or as a worldwide sales company, really, we know what distributors want, because they tell us. They often say, can't you make a movie like this? Can't you do a movie like that? And so it's just the absolute key of this business, is to make sure that you get distribution.
Well, many years ago, movies were made for a U.S. audience. And for producers, it was, in a sense, it was easier because you saw what U.S. audiences responded to, and you could, add that into your decision-making process on the next movies. The foreign markets have become so strong and such a big part of the success of movies that you have to take those markets into consideration at every decision you're making.
I want to know that it's going to be amenable to people in Brazil, in China, in Japan, in Latin America, as well as the United States. You can't just make a movie for the United States today. It's a global business. Roughly 70% of it is coming from the international territories. So you have to have something that is going to play all over the world. You have to have something that you can advertise. If I'm reading a script and I can't think of the ad, the one sheet, then I won't make the movie, because I feel if I can't sell it, I'm not going to make it.
I would say that 15 or 20 years ago, foreign distribution represented 15, 20, 25% of the return expected on the budget of a film. And today, foreign distribution can represent 70 to 80% of the expected return in terms of dollars on a film.
For me, it's always been in a worldwide business. From my studio days, the U.S. is 5% of the world population. It makes no sense to spend all your time on the U.S. So I've really never I've made very few domestically oriented pictures. If you do, then you do it on a budget so that it doesn't have to travel. But I was always looking for, how does this story work in as many countries as possible? And that can be directors. I've used a lot of international directors, sometimes international cast. You try and take out there's no flag waving, I've never made a sports movie. So there are things that you can hone, and when you're doing a comedy, I always say comedies don't travel. Comedies travel, but comedies that are dialogue driven don't travel. So Something About Mary was very successful overseas. As far back as the Sister Act was very successful overseas. Full Monty was more successful overseas than it was in the US, but was successful here. Titanic was successful in every country. So what you're trying to do is figure out what are the elements, how does it market it differently in some countries, and or is it, there's one idea, it's one kind of way in, and you just, that movie will travel because the essential elements of the story, the characters, the themes all play in pretty much the same way. People, if you take a movie like Titanic, if you went to see it in Japan, you went to see it in Brazil, you went to see it in Australia, you went to see it in Bulgaria, people cried at the same spots, they were moved at the same spots, they were scared at the same spots.
You're always trying to be cognizant of what will play worldwide. So what are the genres, and what are the themes, and what are the emotions that are universal? And the more narrow you get in that respect, the harder it is to get the movies made, but B, ultimately we have to release those movies, and you're hoping that you have a universal theme of, laughter, or love, or drama, these things are universal, and that if you can keep a story that is grounded and feels real, and accomplishes those things, then they should play overseas. In terms of just a pure marketing play of going after stories that you think might appeal worldwide, that in my experience generally doesn't work. You just try to find good universal stories that people can feel good and rally behind.
The two biggest selling genres of films, I believe, historically, are horror and family, and I have made both, and family seems to be the most rewarding. As a parent, I always wanted to take my kids to a movie. I was always looking for movies to take my children to, and it was always the least expensive form of entertainment. And compared to a football game, a baseball game, it was always best to take the kids to a movie.
The foreign distributors are very selective of what kind of movies they want. They don't want American movies, they want movies that are going to translate to their country and be relatable to France, for example, or Italy, or Asia, or Brazil. So you have to really do stories, that are international.
More than 2/3 of the revenue for nearly all the Hollywood films, the major studio films, comes from overseas. What does that mean? It means American studios are making films for people who do not speak English.
If you're making a movie that is particularly American, the cost of the movie has to come down. You know, if you're making a movie about baseball or football that nobody cares about, it's got to be a small movie. If you're, you know, we're making The Help, you know, a story about African Americans, you know, the rest of the world is like, well, I don't know, maybe if it's good, you know, but they don't immediately aren't willing to pre-sale necessarily those movies. So you're saying, so when we made The Help, they said, okay, this is just a domestic movie. So assume you're not going to make any money foreign. And we thought, well, if we make a good movie, won't it do well foreign? They said, well, let's not count on it. So when in their estimates, they didn't count any money for foreign. We made a pretty good movie. It made a ton of money in the US. It made $40 million foreign. So our belief was true that if you make a good movie, and it's about human beings, you know, and it's about human values that everybody can relate to. The movie, we screened the movie in Germany, in English, to a German audience, and they loved it. And the studio was very surprised because they couldn't figure out what is it that they're responding to. So they had a focus group and they asked them and they said, it's about human nature.
You better give them physical action and jazzy special effects. A guy in Berlin or Tokyo doesn't want to pay $30 on a date to read subtitles. So it's hugely changed the content. And to the benefit of the studios, the physical action seems to play very well, to the extent that if a producer, director, filmmakers are interested in serious content, which usually means heavily dialogued, harder to get money.
The beauty with foreign distribution is because the DVD market isn't what it once was, and that was our insurance if a movie didn't do well, we now have the European, the global market, the worldwide market, besides the domestic market, to backstop us. So oftentimes a movie will do really well overseas that didn't do so well here. So you're okay, you're protected. So the global market, the worldwide market is critical. It's everything we do, we think about that. We think about China, we think about all the European countries, you know, UK, France, Germany. I mean, those are very big territories. And, you know, you really try to look at your movies when you're making them and go, we think this is going to really work here. And you try to service as much as you can because you need that insurance policy.